Miguel de Cervantes lived a tough but colorful life. He saw fierce combat in the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, which freed the Mediterranean from the Ottoman Empire. But on the way home, he was captured by Turkish pirates, so languished as a hostage for years, missing out on a war hero's homecoming, as the battle steadily faded in the nation's memory. It seems quite likely that the contrast Cervantes experienced between his acts of chivalry and the way life didn't reward them inspired his groundbreaking, later influential novel, Don Quixote. The book was published in 2 parts, the first in 1605, 3 years before Shakespeare's King Lear was staged, Part 2 10 years later in 1615. Cervantes wrote Don Quixote Part 2 in direct response to a fraudulent sequel to his first book, published by an author who remains unknown, in 1614. Yet as it turned out, his 2-part work became a bestseller in his own lifetime, and the single most foundational and imitated novel in all of Western literature, inspiring many great authors. Just 1 century on, Henry Fielding openly acknowledged cloning both Cervantes's key concepts and the best comic scenes from Don Quixote in his novels Tom Jones and Joseph Andrews. Gustave Flaubert loved the novel so much, he said it was in his blood before he could even read. And though writing realist fiction, saw his own Madame Bovary as a female Don Quixote. And when that realist genre underwent reinvention, through Joseph Conrad adding psychological elements to it, the result was Conrad's Lord Jim, a male Madame Bovary rewrite. But the immortal Don Quixote still wasn't finished echoing down the years, because later, F. Scott Fitzgerald would describe The Great Gatsby, his most famous novel, as an American version of Lord Jim. Thus, Cervantes' Spanish character was reborn many times, and to great acclaim, in English, then French, then again English, and finally American personas, across emerging genres and eras. And he became part of the English language, gifting us the word quixotic, referring to an unrealistic crusade, and the phrase tilting at windmills, meaning to fight imaginary enemies. Some critics of the postmodernist novel even say that their favorite genre was born when, in Don Quixote Part 2, the titular character himself saw Don Quixote Part 1 being printed. For these reasons and its many entertaining and inventive features, the Washington Post nominated Don Quixote as their choice of the most important novel of the millennium. To understand Don Quixote, we need to look not only at its plot and central characters, but at the 2 genres it accessed, one with a long tradition, the other only just emerging in the West. The first novel in history, Murasaki's Tale of Genji, preceded Don Quixote by centuries, but its sphere of influence remained the East. Don Quixote would come to be as important in the West. What we now call novels, extended prose narratives, depicting close to real life, were still relatively rare in Cervantes's time, an age dominated by the long-established romance genre. In the 1600s, a romance wasn't a modern-style boy-meets-girl tale, but usually the story of a wandering knight who saves damsels, fights dragons and wizards, and practices courtly love. Don Quixote's plot ingeniously taps both genres, for its main character is a middle-aged, now poor aristocrat who has read every romance, gone mad, and believes himself a knight-errant. A modern equivalent would be watching too many Batman movies, then believing you are the Dark Knight, which it seems a still unknown vigilante actually did in Bradford, England, in February 2013. This Bradford Batman, who captured and delivered a wanted criminal to the police, may or may not have been insane. Don Quixote is definitely psychotic, seeing a totally different reality. The story's narrator differentiates Quixote's reality from our own, telling us, for instance, that the giants this self-styled knight charges, in his most famous misadventure, are in fact windmills. Cervantes, of course, uses Quixote's insanity to create both wonderfully comic and deeply poignant scenes and cleverly adds further layers via two twists: the hero's sidekick and his legacy. Early in his wanderings, the Mad Knight picks up his opposite, Sancho Panza, a very practical, realistic peasant who, at first mainly out of opportunism, becomes his squire. By using the perspectives of such diametrically opposed characters, the author enriches his narrative, which grows more complex as Quixote's outlook gradually infects Sancho Panza. Though Book 1 of the pair's misadventures is, in general, a remarkable comedy, Book 2 shows much more depth, as Cervantes poses philosophical questions about the nature of insanity. In Book 2, Don Quixote remains clearly mad, but Cervantes shows us that, compared to all the sane characters around him, he shines as the truest, noblest, most generous human being. This explains why, in Cervantes' lifetime, the novel was a beloved comedy, but later groups like the Romantics viewed Quixote as a superior man buckled by a violent conformist society. As Book 2 ends, and Don Quixote de la Mancha leaves us, it's with laughter, tears, and a nagging question: what kind of world was this, in which the most chivalrous man was crazy? Or, as Miguel de Cervantes' contemporary William Shakespeare might have put it, are some that this world considers mad, in truth those better angels of our nature? Adiós por ahora.
Since reading courtly romances tipped Don Quixote over the edge, you might be interested to learn how a brilliant female author challenged their social influence in episode 18.